which is today. Suddenly the Mishnah concludes the ashes of a stove is always considered ready. What ashes? What are we talking about here? Who talking about ashes of a stove? We're talking about sand. This is how you learn. The Eifekira Muchnu. And a separate din altogether, I want you to know if you want to use the ashes from your oven, you want to use it to cover the blood, you can. It's as if it was prepared because you're using it on Yom Tov, it's as if it's prepared. Says the Gemara, we're talking about you heated it up before Yom Tov, so the ashes already were prepared before Yom Tov, you knew about it, you're aware of it, so therefore it's not muktzah. But if you heated it up logs and you put it in the fire on Yom Tov, the ashes are brand new, and therefore it's a brand new item. It's muktzah. It wasn't around yesterday, and therefore it's awesome. However, the ashes still hot, still embers there, and it's hot enough that you can actually grill or roast an egg there. Mutter is permitted. Why? Because before Yom Tov, this is firewood, so you had it in mind to use it. And then on Yom Tov, you actually use it for that purpose. You're going to use baking it. And now you can continue using it for baking because you can use the embers and so on to roast an egg, grill an egg. Therefore, it never became muktzah and you can use it. We actually learned something similar. That is, that when we say that the ashes of an oven is prepared, only if it's prepared before Yom Tov. So it's not muktzah. You had it in mind. Also forbidden, because these ashes weren't around yesterday, so it's muktzah. But if you can continue using it for the original purpose, which is to be to cook something, and you can still, it's hot enough, you can grill an egg, muktzah is permitted. But then the Beitza continues, what about hechnis offer leginos? Now the Beitza is coming to expand on this law and says, if you brought a pile of sand into your garden, or bossa into your ruins, and you set it aside, you put it aside in a corner, and your plan is eventually to use all that sand, to spread it around, or whatever the purpose is. Since you intended to use that sand, then you can use it for any purpose you want on Yom Tov. You're allowed to use it to cover the blood. As long as there's a pile of sand there, you're thinking about the whatever use you need, you'll use it for that. Rabbi says, Rabbi then continue and added, Machnis Adam Molekupasa. You can even add a small little box of offer of sand. You can even add a small little box and you put it in a corner. And we say, since you pull it in a corner, it's not bottled to the ground. You thought about it, and you can use it to cover your blood, even though you didn't think about covering the blood at the time when you put it down. You just thought, it'll come to use, and I'll use it when I need it. But use it for any purpose you want. So Mazuta said, name of Mazuta Rabba, is provided you put it on the side, so you showed us that you actually intended to use the sand for some purpose. When we're talking about very soft sand, there's no problem of breaking the sand down, there's no problem of grinding. The only problem here is muktzah, preparing, and that's even though you didn't prepare it specifically to cover the blood, but since you generally intended to use it for some purpose, that's good enough. Basically, I'll ask you a question. It says koi is this animal, but not certain if it's a chaya. Is it a domesticated animal, behemoth? Is it both, or is it a separate animal altogether? In fact, the Rambam Paskin, the rules, is a separate animal altogether. So koi, this particular animal. So because we don't know what it is, we take on all the stringencies. For example, when it comes to fats, we say, oh, maybe it's a behemoth. Fats are forbidden. When it comes to covering the blood, we say, oh, maybe it's a chaya. So you have to cover the blood. So it says here, koi ain't shechtin oisibiyamtiv. You shouldn't shecht it on yamtiv. Why? Because if it's a chaya, it needs kisei adam, but you cannot cover it. You cannot cover the blood. Why not? We'll see in a minute. If you shechted it, ein mechasin is damay. You cannot cover the blood. Why not? Because maybe it's a behemoth, and there's no mitzvah of kisei adam, and then the sand is muktzah. You're taking sand for a purpose that has no use. Because if it's a behemoth, there's no need to cover the blood. So therefore, it's like muktzah. Says in Gemara, but if you're right, that if you had sand set aside for any purpose, you can use it to cover the blood, then use that sand. So why you tell me not to shech the koi, but use the sand that you set aside? Lekasya k'derav Yehuda. Use the sand, the small amount of sand you put aside. Says the Gemara back. Forget Rabbi Yehuda for a moment. If that's what you want to ask, why don't you ask, what about the ashes of the oven? Use that. Or why don't you ask, why don't you use the shovels in the ground? Why don't you use that? Obviously, he didn't have it. So he doesn't have it. We're talking about a case where there's no sand set on the side. But the time maker, according to your question, L'chasya, So forget forget the sand in the corner. Why don't you permit him to shech the koi and cover the blood with avakira, with ashes from the oven, which is prepared? We said if we're allowed to, not, or a shovel that's already inside the sand. But what are you going to tell me? The lesla, you don't have it. No, we're talking about a case where there's no sand put on the side. That's not a question. Says the Gemara, if we're talking there's nothing available to cover the blood with, then why tell me don't shecht the koi? Don't shecht any animal. Don't shecht any chayil. A deer don't shecht. You can't have innocent because how are you going to cover the blood? Why talk about a koi which is in doubt what kind of animal it is? I feel even if it's definitely a chayil, a deer, you shouldn't shecht because you can't cover the blood. Says the Gemara, you're right. The Gemara is trying to give us a chiddush, a novelty. Surely when it comes to deer, you shouldn't shecht. Something when it comes to a koi, which is a suffix. You might say, look, I need meat and yom tov. This animal, maybe it needs kisei adam, maybe it doesn't. If it needs kisei, I don't. So therefore, I don't have any sand available to cover it with. So maybe I should be allowed to shecht it and don't do the kisei and just go ahead and eat it. Maybe the mitzvah is simple yomtiv is so compelling, it's so overarching that lishchayt is allow me to shecht, but and don't cover the blood. And that's the chiddush kamashal. No. If you cannot cover the blood of the koi, don't shecht in the first place. Says the Gemara.
I'm just wondering why. I mean, it might just like it's a bit of a tangent. The Chachmei Talmud never saw a koi, right? It was only in the midbar. Am I correct or not?
You're not correct at all. You're talking about tachash. There's an animal called a tachash.
Yeah, right. But
that's not a koi.
The koi.
Not a koi at all.
Yeah, correct. But what about the koi? Who saw that? When was it around?
I look in your article. What's the English translation of a koi? I don't even know.
What's the English translation? English a koi.
Sorry?
In English, it's translated as a koi.
Now we know. Are there pictures of it?
No.
Okay, so I don't know what a koi is, but whatever it is, it always was around.
When? I don't know.
I have no idea.
Okay.
Once you work out what a koi is, we'll work out then when it came about. I really don't know. I don't know. Says the Gemara, you're telling me that there's nothing available, and that's why you cannot cover the blood, and you shouldn't ask any question about the din of having rice, having sand in the corner. What are you talking about? It says later in the Braisa, but if he did shecht it, if you shecht it, don't cover the blood. Sounds like you could, but we're not going to allow you. But you're telling me you couldn't because there's no sand available. No ashes available, no sand available, no shovel available. So what are you talking about? Miklal, the East we're talking about there is. Ella Amar Rabba says as follows. The ashes, you asked me a question then that how come the says don't shecht or koi? Because you're not allowed to go ahead. The sand is muktzah, but what about the ashes of the oven? We said before the ashes is not muktzah. So therefore, why don't you shecht the koi and use the ashes of the oven? So I'll explain to you why. You can use when we said before you can use the ashes of an oven is only levada. If you know for certain that there's a requirement to cover the blood, go ahead and use the ashes.
Isn't the chiyuv kisui adam with sand or dirt, not ashes? When you get ashes, it's just burnt wood.
Excellent. Tosfos talks about it on the previous page, and he proves in Gemara Chulin that ashes can also be called sand, and the Gemara brings over there that ash can be called sand. In fact, he talks about even other items that if it's burnt down into and you break it down to very small pieces can be used, and it's called offer. He has a discussion about gold, gold shavings, if that can be used. So sand is not limited only to sand. It's an expansive, term. Says the Gemara. But you cannot use it for a suffix. You cannot use ashes for a suffix. So the Gemara, the suffix, my time a lot. So what's the reason? Why can't you use it for a suffix? Why are you telling me you cannot use the ashes for a suffix? Is it because the what do you call it? Is it because the Ka'avid Guma? Is it because we're worried that you're making a hole? And since all you're using it for is to cover something, we're not even sure you have to cover it. So there's no excuse. So even if it's, let's say you definitely have to cover the blood, but you're doing an Issa in the Torah, you're forming a hole. But we're not worried about the hole, like we said a few minutes ago. Like Rab Abba said, it's a malacha she'ena tzichluf. You don't want the hole, and you're ruining the ground. So therefore, why can't you use the ashes also for a suffix? Not really. There's no problem in it. Hachanamik Rab Abba. Something my time. But what's the reason why a koi you cannot use ashes? Gemara said, you know why? Dilma ovid ktisha. We are worried that you might crush it, and therefore, when you crush it, you are grinding, and it's forbidden. Says the Gemara, maybe that pieces, didn't fully turn, into little into shavings. So the Gemara, so if you're worried about ashes, that you might break it down and you're grinding, and if it's, let's say, a deer, it's still a concern that you're going to be violating an issa the Torah of grinding. Says the Gemara, Vadai, when it comes to a case of certainty, you definitely have a mitzvah kisya down. The majority of cases of ashes, it just falls apart in your fingers. There's nothing really to grind. So therefore, the Rabbanan weren't really considered because worse comes to worse, and you are grinding a little bit. The mitzvah, the positive mitzvah of covering the blood, pushes away the avera of grinding. Kika avik tisha ase ase, the mitzvah ase of covering the blood will come, but push away the negative. However, and on the other hand, when it comes to the koi, we're not even sure there's a mitzvah, and therefore we're more careful. Says the Gemara, you want to.
Mitzvah bami avera?
You're asking a very general question. When do we say mitzvah haba ba'avera, and when do we say esed derech? That's what you're asking, because both principles cease to be in conflict. Esed derech says even though you're doing an avera, the pushes away, and mitzvah haba ba'avera says no, the mitzvah is useless because you did it through an avera. The general rule is the way the Noda B'Yehuda says. It explains as follows: all the case of mitzvah haba ba'avera is that the mitzvah is between you and Hashem, and the avera is between you and another person. That person is not responsible for your mitzvahs. And therefore, for example, a stolen lulav, a stolen sukkah, these are all mitzvah haba ba'avera. But when it comes to both the mitzvah and the negative are both from Hashem, then the asay pushes away the license. That's the difference. Okay, it's a good rule to remember. That's the Noda B'Yehuda in his choice. So he says, but even in Esed Derech said there are more restrictions. For example, they have to be in tandem. They have to be simultaneous, concurrently. If you do the Avera first and then the mitzvah, doesn't work, says the Gemara. When you say there was a you're circumcising a baby and there's a leprosy there, you're not a color of leprosy, but in this case, the mitzvah and the Avera are both happening concurrently. Or inamisadin betzitzis. You are wearing tzitzis, a woolen, let's say a linen garment and woolen strings, which is climb, and the mitzvah of tzitzis and climb are both happening at the same time. Why are you doing the very? You're doing that say. Over here, over here, they're not happening at the same time. First, you bring up the ashes, you're breaking it down, and afterwards you're covering the blood. They're not happening at the same time. Where does esed derech come in? Says that's not a problem. Holakash, that isn't really a problem. Why is that a problem? You know what we're talking about over here? We're talking about here while you are actually crushing it. You're crushing it and covering the blood both at the same time. Not that you break it in one part and then you bring it over to the blood. You're doing it right on top of the blood. So therefore, the mitzvah and the avera happening simultaneously, and therefore by a vadai we'll say the mitzvah pushes it away, but by a suffix, by a koi, we're too concerned and there's no real mitzvah. Says Gemara, but what are you talking about? So we had in Gemara Shabbos Daf Chav Hey, according to Rav Ashi at least, Yom Tov is an asay and a loisus. Most opinions are that Yom Tov is only an avera. You're not doing any work. Rav Ashi introduced that on Yom Tov, not only you're not allowed to do any work, there's also a positive mitzvah to rest. In fact, Rava himself argues over there, but maybe Rava then changed his mind, or Rava is trying to answer according to everybody. The ain't esed derech say. So what are you telling me that on Yom Tov we're not worried about a deer taking the ashes, even though you're crushing it? The mitzvah of covering the blood pushes away the avera of breaking it up, but there's more than just an avera here. There's a positive and a negative. Elama Rava. So Rava is giving an answer over here to answer according to those who hold that it's both. Eifekira, he said it follows, very simple. Eifekira, when it comes to the ashes, is daito levada. What are you thinking? I'm going to use these ashes for anything that I need to. In other words, what's need to? Need to is things which are vada. But they ain't daito l'safik. When you say anything I need to, you did not anticipate that you're going to use it for a koi, which is only a suffix, and therefore it's muktzah. And that's the problem in it. It is muktzah because you didn't think about it and the ashes as well. You said, I'll use the ashes. You thought, I'll use it for whatever purpose I can for something that I definitely need to. How do I know that? Maybe once you decide I'll use it for anything that I need, maybe anything, even where it's a doubt. Rav is consistent with you. Hechnis of you brought in sand, you brought in sand to cover the excrement. You're allowed to cover the blood of a bird because once you bring it in for one purpose, you can use it for any purpose as long as it's a purpose. But if your intention was if your intention was to use it to cover blood of a bird, you're not allowed to cover the excrement of a child because you didn't know for sure that it will happen. It was just a suffix. If it happens, I'll use the sand for that. Since you didn't think of it, it's only a suffix, therefore it's not included. So you see, Rava holds that a koi, which is a suffix, the ashes were not set aside for the thing. Same with the dirt. That Rabbi Yehuda said if you put it on the side, it's only for things that you need, not for a suffix. Nahar B'loi Amri, Nahar B'loi disagrees, and he says, Afilu hechnis afal lechasas by dam tziparim. He brought in sand to cover the blood of a bird. Mutter lechasas by tzoya. Once he brought it in for a use, I can use it even for things that you're not 100% sure. Amri b'marava in Yisrael in the West, they said pligi bar Rabbi Yasi bar Chama bar Rabbi Zeda. They said that Rabbi Yasi, the son of Chama and Rabbi Zeda, argue. And the others say Rava b'rei Rabbi Yasi bar Chama. Rava, the son of Rabbi Yosef bar Chama. Rabbi Yosef bar Chama's son. And Rabbi Zeda argue. Now this Rava, the son of Rabbi Yosef, son of Chama, is actually the Rava that we have all over Shas. Not sure why suddenly here they decided to give us his father's name. Chad Omar, so one of them say, Koi is the same state as Harei Ketzoya. Koi is a doubt. Tzoya, the excrement of a young child, is also a doubt whether it's going to happen or not. The Chad Omar, the other one says, Koi Eina Ketzoya. The other one says that koi is not like excrement at all. In other words, excrement is much more probable than a koi is a 50-50 chance. You don't know what it is. But excrement, children generally every single day they make waste and whatever, and therefore there's a strong possibility you'll need a sand for that. In all probability, Rav is the one who says that koi is just like soya, and it's a doubt, and therefore it's not included. If you brought in sand to cover the soya, you're allowed to then cover the blood with tzipper, because surely that's included. You cannot cover soya. So too, he says you cannot cover koi. So we see that soya and koi, according to Rava, is the same thing. Tistayim, we can conclude. Rami Bereyed Rabbi Rama koi. He says, I'll give you a whole different reason. You're talking about koi because it's muktzah, and when you set aside the sand or the ashes, your question is, do you also anticipate things which are doubtful? And that's the argument. He said, I'll give you another reason why koi, you're not allowed to cover the blood, on Yom Tov. You know why? We are worried. If you're going to tell him to go ahead on Yom Tov and cover the blood, he'll think, koi, it's a chaya, it's like a deer, so I can eat the fat, and a mistake will arise. If you allow him on Yom Tov to do something which normally you're not allowed to do, he'll think, definitely that's a chaya, and you'll eat the fat. So how come the weekday we tell him to cover the blood, the same mistake can arise? So we answer no. People will see him, let's say, covering the blood with sand, who think, he's just trying to clean up. Doesn't mean he's doing a mitzvah, so nobody who's observing is going to make that mistake. So if they see him shechting in a dirty place, and yet he's covering the blood, then obvious to everyone he's doing kisei dam. So people observing will say, I didn't realize koi is a chaya, and they'll make a mistake and eat the fats. Why aren't we worried? So the Gemara said, and furthermore, bol malach, if he asks a Rav, should I cover the koi during the week? That the Rav tells me, cover the koi. He'll make a mistake and think that the fats are permitted. I'm not exactly sure what that means, because any Rav, you should tell Rabbani, when you give up psak, make sure you explain yourself very well, and you tell him, cover the blood, but don't make a bracha, because we're not sure if it's a behem or a chaya. So I'm not sure exactly why we think that a mistake will arise from that. But anyway, in the weekday, so what? In the weekday, even he will think, well, maybe he'll come to the conclusion that we're not 100% sure what the koi is, and therefore we're machmir, we cover the blood, but I don't need the fat. He's not going to make a mistake. Amri le Rabban will say, Zil Torach because the Rabban will say, you know what? Be machmir, cover the blood. People generally know we're not sure, but the Yom Tov, on Yom Tov, if we tell him cover the blood, he knows that it's a problem of muktzah. He knows all kinds of issues with the sand. or the ashes. If we tell him to cover it, what's I can tell him? The reason why they tell me is because definitely it's a chaya. So I'll eat the fats. If we're not sure if it's a chaya or not, would the rabbis tell me zil torach v'kosi, go ahead and be matriach and bother yourself and cover it? That's why he'll make a mistake. So therefore, we don't want you to shech the koy on Yom Tov, because we don't want you to cover the blood, because mistakes can arise. Not only koy, even b'shechted a behema, which does not require kisei adam, and then you shechted a chaya at the same time a deer, which does require it, and if a bird, all the blood got mixed together. So some of the blood has to be covered, some of them doesn't. Also, you're not allowed to cover it on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to cover it on Yom Tov because the part of the blood there is from an animal, and you're doing extra bother for something that doesn't require kisei. We don't want you to bother yourself on Yom Tov. This is mid the rabbanon. You have to rest. You'll need more than one shovelful to cover all the blood. So that second shovelful is an extra tircha. But if you can cover all the blood with one shovel, mutter, then we don't care if you cover the blood of the behemoth as well. It's no extra tircha. Says Gemara Pshita, isn't that obvious? No. I would have thought nigzer the kira achas outer state kids. I would have thought, you know what? Let's be careful. Kamash Malan, that we're not worried. I want, we say if it's one shovelful, then you cover all the blood. Should we go to the Mishnah? Or it's long enough? Okay, maybe we'll stop over here. I'll continue tomorrow. So I'm going to wish everyone a Gmar Tov, a Gmar Simcha.